fiduciary treason. Do not let the corporate marketing budget deceive you for a single...
Stephanie White just made a public statement that broke the internet. And I need you to understand something right now before we go any further. The people calling this a conspiracy, the people screaming sabotage, the people saying the whole organization is out to get Caitlin Clark. They are missing the point entirely. Because what is actually happening inside that Indiana Fever building right now is not a betrayal driven by jealousy or ego or personal grudges. It is something colder than that. Something more calculated. Something that does not need a villain to be dangerous. It is a mathematical trap. And the Indiana Fever front office just walked straight into it with both eyes open. Stay with me until the end of this video, and you are going to find out 3 things that most people covering this story are completely ignoring. First, the single number buried inside the new WNBA Collective Bargaining Agreement that makes Stephanie White's statement make complete financial sense, and why that is actually scarier than if it were pure spite. Second, what the data from last season genuinely tells us about what happens to this Indiana Fever offense every single time Caitlin Clark gets taken off the ball. And trust me, it is not a pretty picture. And third, the real reason why what is unfolding right now in that front office, in that locker room, in this exact moment of Caitlin Clark's career, matters for the future of women's sports in a way that goes so much bigger than any basketball game. Quick note before we get into it. Everything you are about to hear is based on publicly available information, verified reporting, and our own breakdown of the data and the film. This channel is not affiliated with Caitlin Clark, the Indiana Fever, or the WNBA. We are not here to pick a side. We are here to follow the numbers wherever they lead. All opinions you hear are for informational and entertainment purposes. We respect every player and every professional in this conversation. Now, let's go. Let's start with exactly what was said because I think a lot of people reacted to the headline without sitting with the actual words. Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White on record, in front of cameras with full awareness that the entire women's basketball world was paying attention, stated that retaining Kelsey Mitchell is the franchise's #1 free agency priority heading into this season, not building around Aaliyah Boston's interior presence, not designing a system that maximizes what analytics consistently show is the most economically impactful player this league has ever seen, not centering the conversation around the woman who single-handedly changed what a WNBA broadcast contract looks like. Kelsey Mitchell, #1 priority. Now, the internet did exactly what the internet always does. Within hours, the reactions split into 2 camps that were both loud, both confident, and both fundamentally missing what is actually going on here. Camp 1 went full conspiracy. The narrative was immediate. White hates Clark. The organization wants to suppress her. This is coordinated sabotage to keep her numbers down so they do not have to pay her. The language got extreme fast. Corporate treason, deliberate destruction, an inside job. Camp 2 dismissed everything. They said White was simply talking about free agency roster management, that Mitchell is an unrestricted free agent who needs to be re-signed, that people were wildly overreading a completely standard coaching statement, and that the entire drama was manufactured outrage with no substance. And here is the honest truth: both camps are wrong, and neither one of them is asking the right question. The right question is not whether Stephanie White personally likes or dislikes Caitlin Clark. The right question is this: when you look at the actual structure of the new CBA, does that statement make cold, rational, financially calculated sense? And if the answer is yes, what does that tell us about what is coming this season? Because when you actually run those numbers, not as talking points, not as ammunition for a Twitter argument, but as a serious financial analysis, what you find will genuinely unsettle you. And it has absolutely nothing to do with anyone's personal feelings about Caitlin Clark. But before we get to the money, I need to stop and address something directly. Because this is the part that the most emotionally charged content out there keeps skipping, and it is genuinely important. Caitlin Clark cannot leave Indiana right now. I need to say that one more time slowly because it is being ignored on a massive scale. Clark is currently in year 3 of a 4-year rookie contract. She is not a free agent. She does not have the ability to request a trade and force it through. She cannot accept a European contract and use that as leverage to reset her WNBA situation. She cannot choose to suit up for the New York Liberty next month. The Indiana Fever own her professional rights. Full stop. So, every comment saying she should pack her bags, every video claiming she is about to walk, every fan asking why she has not demanded a trade. Yet, those are conversations being had by people who do not understand how professional sports contracts function. And there is no shame in that. But we need to clear the board before we can have the real conversation. The real conversation lives inside a document called the 2025 Collective Bargaining Agreement. And that is exactly where the trap was set. The new CBA was signed in 2025, and it was genuinely celebrated. Higher salaries across the board, improved travel conditions, better health care, real, meaningful progress for the athletes who built this league, and it deserved to be celebrated. But buried inside the new rookie-scale contract structure is a specific clause that created a financial pressure cooker, and nobody is talking about it with any real honesty. Here is how the mechanism works. Under the new agreement, players on rookie contracts can trigger what is called a supermax escalator based on individual performance milestones in their first 3 seasons. Specifically, and this is the critical part, if a player wins the Most Valuable Player award during those early contract years, she becomes eligible for a supermax extension worth approximately $1,700,000 per year on a 4-year deal. $1,700,000 per year. Now, I know that number sounds modest compared to what you hear in NBA conversations, but inside the WNBA's current salary structure, that figure is franchise-altering. That number does not just affect one contract, it restructures everything around it. And Caitlin Clark right now, as we head into this season, is sitting as a co-favorite to win that MVP award alongside Aja Wilson. But that is only half of the equation. Because at exactly the same time, Aaliyah Boston, one of the most important frontcourt players in the entire league, a genuine cornerstone of what made Indiana functional as a team last season, is also approaching a major contract milestone. Her next deal is projected in the range of $1,300,000 per year. Okay, now we add the third number, Kelsey Mitchell. The player, Stephanie White, just declared her #1 priority. A maximum contract for Mitchell in free agency comes in at approximately $1,400,000 per year. You see where this is going. Clark Supermax, $1,700,000. Boston Max, $1,300,000. Mitchell Max, $1,400,000. Add those together. That is $4,400,000. On a WNBA salary cap that structurally cannot support that combination of contracts simultaneously. That is not a conspiracy. That is not personal. That is a salary cap collision that the front office can see coming from a mile away. And the way you avoid that collision, at least in the short term, at least on paper, is by making decisions that reduce the likelihood of the most expensive trigger activating. And the most expensive trigger is Caitlin Clark winning MVP. Now here is where Stephanie White's public statement starts to feel different when you hold it up against this financial context. When a head coach publicly declares on record that a veteran player, not the franchise's most economically valuable asset, not the player rewriting attendance records, but a 29-year-old volume scorer, is the #1 organizational priority. 2 things happen simultaneously. 1, you signal to that veteran player that she is valued, which helps in free agency negotiations. 2, and this is the part people are not saying out loud, you begin constructing a public narrative. A narrative where the offense is built around Mitchell, where Clark is a piece of the system rather than the engine of it, where the MVP conversation gets distributed across multiple players instead of centering on one. And if that narrative takes hold, if the way this team is talked about going into the season frames Clark as a secondary creator, her usage shifts. Her numbers look different. The MVP committee's attention drifts. And if Clark does not win MVP this season, the Supermax clock does not trigger. I am not sitting here telling you Stephanie White drew this out on a whiteboard. I am not claiming there is a document somewhere with Clark's name on it and the word suppress written in red ink. I genuinely do not believe it works that way. What I am telling you is that the financial incentive structure now existing inside that organization makes it economically rational in a completely short-sighted franchise-destroying way to not deploy Caitlin Clark at full capacity. And that is more disturbing than any conspiracy theory could ever be. Because a conspiracy gets stopped when someone gets exposed. A bad incentive structure that runs itself on autopilot. Nobody has to make a decision. The system just quietly produces the outcome that protects the budget. Now let's leave the money behind for a moment and talk about what actually happens on a basketball court. Because this is where the numbers get uncomfortable, not for Clark, but for anyone arguing that Stephanie White's offensive philosophy is compatible with what Clark actually does at her best. Caitlin Clark is not a shooting guard who spaces the floor and waits for the ball. She is not a spot-up three-point specialist you park in the corner while someone else runs the offense. She is a point-of-attack, floor-spacing, vision-first point guard whose value as a player is almost entirely tied to one specific thing: her ability to control the pace and geometric reality of the offense in real time. When she is at the top of the key reading the defense as it shifts and rotates, making the live decision to pull from 30 feet or fire a skip pass to the weak side corner or thread a no-look through a closing window, that is when Indiana Fever is genuinely dangerous. That is when defenses break down. That is when the offense creates advantages that the box score cannot fully capture. When you move her off the ball, ask her to set screens, spot her up in the corner, reduce her to a second option in a half-court system built around someone else. Her impact collapses. Not because she is not trying, because the weapon you are deploying is completely wrong for the role you are asking it to fill. The numbers from last season told this story clearly. When Clark was functioning as the primary ball handler, directing traffic, controlling tempo, making decisions with the ball in her hands, Indiana's offensive efficiency climbed measurably. When she was placed in a reduced role, the offense became predictable. It slowed down. It became easier to scout, easier to defend, and harder to watch. Now think about the tactical profile of Kelsey Mitchell and what building around her actually means. Mitchell is a gifted scorer. She can create her own shot. She has real mid-range ability and legitimate pull-up range. But her offensive game is fundamentally volume-based. It is isolation-heavy. She takes a high number of field goal attempts relative to her assist numbers. Her usage in isolation situations is among the highest on this roster. That style of basketball is not just different from what Clark does. It is structurally opposed to it. When the offensive system centers on one player, taking 20 to 25 shots per game in predominantly one-on-one situations, floor spacing collapses. Movement dies. The passing angles that make Clark's vision dangerous simply do not open up. You are essentially running two incompatible operating systems on the same hardware and wondering why the machine keeps freezing. Think about Steph Curry in his first few seasons before Steve Kerr arrived in Golden State. Curry was effective. He was clearly talented. But the system around him was not designed for what he could actually do at his ceiling. And then Kerr came in and said, "We are building everything around what this specific player does when he is operating at full capacity." And the rest of that story rewrote basketball history. Indiana Fever right now is standing at that exact fork in the road. They can choose to build the system around the player with the deepest shooting range in the league, the passing vision that creates advantages before the defense can even react, and an economic gravity that has demonstrably reshaped what this sport looks like financially. Or they can fit that player into a framework built for a different kind of player entirely. The film from last season tells you what the current coaching staff is leaning toward. And here is the thing that nobody in this conversation wants to name directly, so I am going to name it. What the new CBA accidentally created inside the Indiana Fever organization is a structural conflict of interest between winning basketball games and managing the payroll. Follow the logic all the way through with me. If Indiana maximizes, Caitlin Clark gives her full control of the offense, builds the roster around her specific strengths, deploys her in every situation where she creates the most value, the natural result is that Indiana becomes a legitimate playoff contender. Clark's statistics reflect her actual impact. The MVP conversation stays centered on her name. She wins the award. And the moment she wins the award, the organization is contractually obligated to offer her a deal worth $1,700,000 per year, starting in 2027, on top of existing commitments to Boston, on top of whatever they owe Mitchell, on top of everything else. So, the financially conservative decision keeping the payroll at a number, the front office feels comfortable defending to ownership runs directly against the competitively correct decision, which is winning basketball games by deploying your most valuable player at maximum efficiency. That is a structural conflict of interest. It does not require bad intentions. It does not require anyone to be a villain. It just requires a salary cap system that accidentally punishes organizational excellence. The NBA worked through this calculus decades ago. When you have a franchise player, you pay them. You build around them. You accept that their contract dominates your payroll because the alternative, losing them, or worse, undermining their performance while they are still on your roster, costs you exponentially more in the long run. In revenue, in attendance, in the television deals that fund the entire operation. The WNBA is learning this lesson right now in real time. And Indiana Fever is positioned to become the case study that teaches it to the entire league. Because here is the economic reality that no executive in that building can honestly ignore. Caitlin Clark generated something this sport has never seen. Viewership numbers described as historic. Attendance that filled arenas which were previously playing in front of partial crowds at best. A multi-year, multi-network television deal that the league signed in the direct context of what the Clark era demonstrated was possible. Those numbers pay salaries. They fund operations. They justify the executive compensation of the very people who are now trying to manage Clark's market leverage. If Clark finishes this season in a reduced role playing in a system that does not fit her on a roster whose public priority is a veteran player, under a coaching staff whose stated offensive philosophy works against her strengths, and she reaches free agency in 2027, she will leave. And when she leaves, the arena goes quiet in a way that no marketing campaign will fix. The television partners negotiated their deals around a WNBA that includes Caitlin Clark. The sponsors came in based on what Clark demonstrated was the audience for this sport. The casual fans buying tickets for the first time in their lives are there because of her. You cannot separate the economic boom from the player who created it. Any front office that tries is not making a basketball decision. They are setting fire to the most valuable asset in the history of their franchise and calling it financial discipline. Here's the thing, though. Beyond all the contracts, beyond the cap, math, beyond the tactical breakdowns, Clark's situation right now teaches us something that extends way past sport. When you are the person who fundamentally changes the economics of the room, you walk into the system does not always celebrate you for it. Sometimes it tries to manage you, contain you, make sure your growth does not outpace its ability to control the outcome. Clark walked into a professional league at 22 years old and did not arrive quietly. She arrived and immediately started rewriting what was possible. Attendance records broadcast deals, global attention that women's basketball had never commanded. And the response from certain corners of that system was not how do we maximize this? It was how do we manage this? That is not unique to basketball. That happens in every industry, every organization. Whenever someone proves that the old model was leaving value on the table, the people who built the old model do not always say thank you. They say, slow down, fall in line, let the system do what systems do. But the organizations that figure out how to build around the person who changes the game instead of forcing that person back into the old game, those are the organizations that win, the ones that do not. They spend the next decade watching someone else win with the asset they wasted. Clark did not answer her critics with arguments. She answered them by playing. The only question left is whether Indiana Fever is smart enough to get completely out of her way and let her keep doing it. Now, I want to hear from you directly. If Caitlin Clark has ever given you a moment, a pull-up from the logo, a no-look pass, you had to rewind 3 times a performance that made you forget you were watching a regular season game, drop a basketball emoji in the comments right now. Let's see how many people are genuinely locked into this story. And I want your real take on the bigger question. Do you think the Indiana Fever front office and coaching staff are making these decisions purely on basketball merit? Or do you believe the financial structure of the new CBA has created incentives that are working directly against Clark's development, whether anyone intended that or not? Drop your honest answer below. We read every single comment. We do not delete opinions. We want the real conversation happening here. And if you think this story deserves more than a 30-second hot take, share this video. Every view, every comment, every share puts this analysis in front of more fans who deserve the full picture instead of just the loudest headline. Now you know the real structure of what is happening inside Indiana Fever right now. But here is what I have not told you yet. There is one player in this league whose contract situation heading into 2027 could completely reshape the entire landscape of this conversation. And when you understand her leverage, Clark's situation looks very different. I already broke it down in full. It is right there on your screen. Do not skip it.